The morning sun streamed through the wide windows of Eastbridge High School, casting a golden glow on the bustling hallways. It was an ordinary school day for most students, but for others, it was a day of nerves, anticipation, and opportunity. Posters announcing the annual talent show, Eastbridge's Got Talent, plastered the walls, featuring bold letters and vibrant images of past winners. Groups of students gathered in clusters, some excitedly practicing lines or routines while others whispered about the competition's stakes. In the mix was Amara, a bright and determined sophomore with a voice that could silence a room. Clutching her backpack and a small notebook filled with scribbled lyrics, she navigated the crowded halls with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Today was her chance to showcase the song she had been working on for months, her shot at proving herself in a school where she often felt overshadowed. Despite her nerves, she walked with purpose, her head held high, a quiet determination shining in her eyes. As Amara stepped into her first period English class, the room buzzed with chatter. Students filed into their seats, discussing their plans for the day. Amara took her usual spot near the middle of the classroom, unpacking her notebook and pencil. The teacher, Mr. Lawson, a middle-aged man with graying hair and an air of authority, stood at the front, flipping through papers. Known for his stern demeanor and subtle favoritism, Mr. Lawson had a reputation for favoring the more affluent students while often dismissing others. Amara caught his eye as she walked in. His expression shifted slightly, a fleeting look of disapproval crossing his face before he returned to his stack of papers. Amara, used to his lack of warmth, brushed it off. She had bigger things to focus on today than Mr. Lawson's opinions. "Settle down, everyone," Mr. Lawson called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "We have a lot to cover this morning." The class quieted, and Mr. Lawson began his lecture on persuasive writing. As he spoke, his tone carried a sharp edge, one that often made students reluctant to ask questions. Amara jotted down notes, her mind occasionally wandering to the lyrics in her notebook. She tapped her pencil against the desk, rehearsing verses silently, eager for the day to progress. Midway through the class, Mr. Lawson announced an impromptu exercise. "All right," he said, pacing the room. "Let's test your ability to think critically. Imagine you're preparing an argument to convince someone of your unique talents. Each of you will write a short paragraph and share it aloud." The students groaned collectively, but Amara felt a spark of excitement. She saw it as an opportunity to practice her confidence for the talent show. As the room fell silent, the scratching of pens and pencils filled the air. When it was time to share, Mr. Lawson scanned the room and pointed to Amara. "Miss Robinson," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. "Let's hear yours." Amara stood, clutching her paper. Her voice was steady as she read, detailing her passion for music and her belief in its ability to connect people. She spoke with conviction, her words reflecting the very essence of her determination. But as she finished, Mr. Lawson arched an eyebrow. "Music, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "And what exactly do you think you'll achieve with that? It's hardly a practical ambition, is it?" The room fell silent. A few students exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others smirked, sensing Mr. Lawson's intent to undermine her. Amara's cheeks flushed, but she stood her ground. "I believe I can make a difference through my music, sir," she said, her voice firm but respectful. Mr. Lawson chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "Well, let's hope the judges at the talent show find it as convincing as you do." The comment stung, not just for its dismissiveness, but for the public nature of the critique. Amara sat down, her mind racing. While Mr. Lawson moved on to the next student, her excitement for the day dimmed slightly. She had anticipated nerves, but not this level of public doubt. As the class continued, Amara's resolve began to strengthen. Mr. Lawson's words, though cutting, fueled her determination. She reminded herself of the countless hours she had spent practicing, of her mother's encouragement and her own unwavering belief in her abilities. She wasn't going to let one person's negativity define her day or her future. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Amara packed her things with a renewed sense of purpose. She glanced at Mr. Lawson one last time, noting the smug expression he wore as he shuffled his papers. "He doesn't think I'm good enough," she thought, "but I'll prove him wrong." As she walked out of the classroom, the hum of the school's energy surrounded her once more. Friends called out to her, wishing her luck for the talent show, and she responded with a warm smile. The stage awaited, and Amara was ready to rise above the doubt and make it her own. In the distance, Mr. Lawson watched her go, his judgment already set. But little did he know, this was not the story of a girl silenced by shame. It was the story of a star about to rise. Amara Robinson was the kind of student who refused to let her circumstances define her. With a natural talent for music and an insatiable curiosity for learning, she had a spark that set her apart. Yet, in the structured world of Eastbridge High, that spark often went unnoticed. Her teachers recognized her as a capable student but rarely celebrated her potential. Among her peers, she was admired for her determination, but frequently excluded from the spotlight reserved for those who seemed to fit the mold. Her journey had been shaped by resilience. Growing up in a close-knit family, Amara had always found solace in their unwavering support. Her mother, a hard-working nurse, often reminded her, "Amara, your voice is a gift. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her grandfather, a retired jazz musician, was her greatest champion. He had taught her to sing and play the piano, passing on stories of his own struggles and triumphs as a black artist in a world that wasn't always welcoming. At school, however, Amara faced a different reality. She had long noticed the subtle disparities, the way her ideas in group projects were sometimes overshadowed, or how she received stricter feedback on her assignments compared to others. While she had developed a thick skin, the inequities weighed on her. Talent and hard work seemed insufficient in a system that often judged her before she had the chance to prove herself. Amara's encounters with Mr. Lawson epitomized these struggles. An experienced teacher with decades in the classroom, Mr. Lawson was known for his traditional methods and strict demeanor. To some, he was a figure of authority who set high standards. To others, he was a gatekeeper, determining who deserved recognition and who did not. Unconscious or not, Mr. Lawson's biases were evident. He gravitated toward students who reflected his own ideals of success, confident, well-connected, and predominantly white. These students often received his encouragement, their mistakes met with patience, and their efforts rewarded with praise. On the other hand, students like Amara, who didn't fit into his narrow expectations, were met with skepticism. Their successes were downplayed, and their shortcomings magnified. For Mr. Lawson, this favoritism wasn't malicious. It was simply how he had come to see the world. He believed he was being objective, rewarding merit where it was due. Yet, his behavior revealed a deeper prejudice, a tendency to dismiss potential when it didn't align with his assumptions. Students from marginalized backgrounds like Amara often bore the brunt of this outlook. Despite these challenges, Amara refused to falter. Her family's support fueled her resilience, and her love for music provided an outlet to channel her emotions. Every evening after school, she would retreat to her room or her grandfather's small music studio, pouring her heart into her songs. Her lyrics spoke of dreams, struggles, and hope, capturing the essence of her journey. For Amara, music was more than a talent. It was her way of telling the world who she was. The upcoming talent show at Eastridge High had been a beacon of hope for her. It was her chance to step into the light and show everyone what she was capable of. Yet, as much as she prepared, a nagging doubt lingered in her mind. Would her performance be judged on its merit, or would she once again be overshadowed by those deemed more deserving? Mr. Lawson's attitude only added to this uncertainty. His veiled critiques and dismissive comments were a constant reminder of the uphill battle she faced. In his eyes, Amara was competent but unremarkable, a student who needed to know her place rather than aim for greatness. He saw her ambition as overconfidence, her talent as unproven. But what Mr. Lawson underestimated was the depth of Amara's resolve. She had spent her life navigating these barriers, and each one had only made her stronger. Her family had taught her to hold her head high, to see her worth even when others didn't. As the talent show approached, she resolved to carry that strength with her on to the stage. In the classroom, Mr. Lawson prepared for the event with indifference, certain that his favored students would shine. Meanwhile, Amara worked tirelessly, pouring everything she had into her performance. For her, this wasn't just about winning a competition. It was about claiming her space in a world that often tried to overlook her. Little did Mr. Lawson know, the stage he so often used to define others' worth would soon be the very place where his perceptions were shattered, and Amara's light would shine brighter than ever. The atmosphere in Mr. Lawson's classroom was electric with anticipation as the students prepared for the upcoming school talent show. For many, it was a light-hearted exercise, an opportunity to showcase skills and enjoy a break from the usual routine. But for Amara, this was much more than just a performance. It was a chance to prove herself, not only to her peers but to the faculty, who often seemed to overlook her potential. She sat at her desk, nervously humming the tune of her song, clutching her notebook filled with lyrics she had poured her heart into. "All right, everyone," Mr. Lawson called, his voice sharp and commanding. "We're going to run through some of your performances today. Let's see if we have any real talent in this room." The students shifted uneasily in their seats. While some were excited to showcase their progress, others were anxious. Mr. Lawson's critiques were infamous for their bluntness, and he rarely sugar-coated his opinions. Amara kept her gaze on her notebook, silently rehearsing her song, willing herself to remain confident. One by one, students took their turn, presenting snippets of their acts. Mr. Lawson nodded approvingly at a few, offering mild praise to those he considered the front-runners. When it was Amara's turn, she hesitated for a moment before stepping to the front of the room. Her heart pounded as she adjusted the small keyboard set up for the rehearsal, her fingers trembling slightly. She began to play, her voice soft but filled with emotion, as the first notes floated through the room. Amara's melody carried a soulful weight, each word resonating with her audience. For a brief moment, the classroom was still, her performance holding everyone's attention. But before she could finish, Mr. Lawson interrupted. "Stop," he said, raising a hand. Amara froze, her fingers hovering over the keys. "That's enough," he said flatly, leaning back in his chair. "It's fine, I suppose, but it's lacking something. Passion, maybe. Or polish. Whatever it is, I'm not convinced." Amara blinked, her cheeks burning. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Mr. Lawson continued. "You know, Amara," he said, his tone laced with condescension, "not everyone is cut out for this kind of thing. It's important to recognize our strengths and weaknesses. Perhaps your talents lie elsewhere." The words landed like a blow, and the room fell silent. Amara's classmates exchanged glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A few looked down, unwilling to meet her eyes. The weight of the teacher's dismissive remark was palpable, its undertones impossible to ignore. Amara swallowed hard, willing herself not to cry. "Thank you for the feedback, Mr. Lawson," she said quietly, her voice steady, despite the lump in her throat. She returned to her seat, her classmates watching her with a mix of sympathy and awkward silence. As the lesson continued, Amara kept her head down, pretending to take notes while her mind raced. She replayed Mr. Lawson's words, feeling the sting of humiliation and the weight of the unspoken prejudice behind them. Yet, beneath her initial hurt, a spark of determination began to grow. "I'll show him," she thought, gripping her pen tightly. "I'll show all of them." After class, a few students approached her hesitantly. "Hey, Amara," one of them said, a shy smile on their face. "I thought your song was amazing. Don't listen to him." Another added, "Yeah, seriously. He's always like that. Don't let it get to you." Their words were a small comfort, a reminder that not everyone shared Mr. Lawson's narrow-minded perspective. Amara thanked them, her voice soft but sincere. While their encouragement couldn't erase the pain of the moment, it reminded her that she wasn't entirely alone. Still, many of her classmates remained silent, afraid to challenge the authority of Mr. Lawson. They averted their gazes, avoiding any acknowledgement of the incident. For them, it was easier to remain uninvolved, to pretend they hadn't witnessed the blatant bias on display. As the day went on, Amara carried the moment with her, its weight heavy, but not unbearable. She knew this was far from the first time someone had underestimated her or tried to belittle her dreams, but she also knew she couldn't let it define her. Quietly, she resolved to channel the pain into her performance. If Mr. Lawson thought she wasn't cut out for this, she was determined to prove him wrong. That evening, Amara returned home with her head held high, though her emotions simmered beneath the surface. The sting of Mr. Lawson's words replayed in her mind, each dismissive comment fueling a mix of hurt and determination. She dropped her school bag by the door and went straight to the small music studio her grandfather had set up in their modest home. It was her sanctuary, the place where she could pour her heart into her music and leave the world behind. Sitting at the piano, she stared at the keys for a moment, her hands trembling with frustration. Then, she took a deep breath and began to play. The melody started softly, reflecting her initial sadness, but as she continued, the notes grew bolder, more resolute. The song she had prepared for the talent show transformed into something new, something raw and deeply personal. Every note, every lyric, became a declaration of her worth, a refusal to be defined by anyone else's expectations. Her grandfather, hearing the music, entered the room quietly and stood by the door. He watched as Amara poured her emotions into her song, his heart swelling with pride. When she finished, he approached her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've got something special, Amara," he said, his voice steady and warm. "Don't ever let anyone take that from you. That stage tomorrow, it's yours. Show them who you are." His words struck a chord, reigniting the fire within her. "Thanks, Grandpa," she replied, her voice softer now, but brimming with resolve. She spent the rest of the night practicing, perfecting every note and lyric until she was certain her performance would leave no room for doubt. The next morning, the school buzzed with excitement as students and teachers filled the auditorium for the talent show. Performers milled about backstage, adjusting costumes and tuning instruments, while the audience settled into their seats. Amara stood in the wings, her hands clasped tightly around the microphone. She took a deep breath, centering herself, her grandfather's words echoing in her mind. When her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights casting a spotlight on her. The audience quieted, their chatter fading into silence as she adjusted the microphone. For a moment, she hesitated, scanning the crowd. Mr. Lawson sat near the front, his expression indifferent as though he expected her to fail. But Amara wasn't performing for him. She was performing for herself, and for every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. As the first note of her song filled the auditorium, the atmosphere shifted. Her voice was powerful and emotive, carrying a depth that immediately captivated the audience. The lyrics spoke of resilience, of rising above challenges, and of finding strength in the face of adversity. By the time she reached the chorus, the crowd was entranced, their attention fully on her. Amara's performance was flawless, each note and word resonating with authenticity. As she sang the final line, the audience erupted into applause, their cheers filling the room. Her classmates, who had previously offered quiet words of support, now stood and clapped enthusiastically. Even those who had remained silent the day before couldn't help but join in the ovation. Backstage, Amara's friends rushed to greet her, their excitement contagious. "You were amazing," one of them exclaimed. "You just stole the whole show." As she stood amidst the praise and congratulations, Amara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had proven not only her talent but her resilience. She had faced doubt and prejudice and emerged stronger, her voice louder than ever. And though Mr. Lawson remained seated, his expression unreadable, Amara didn't need his approval. She had already won, and the stage was hers. Amara stood at the center of the stage, her heart pounding as the principal stepped forward to announce the results. The audience had barely settled from their roaring applause, and the excitement in the room was palpable. "The winner of this year's talent show," the principal began, his voice steady but laced with pride, "is someone who embodies not only talent, but resilience and grace. Let's give a round of applause to Amara." The auditorium erupted once again, students cheering and clapping, some even chanting her name. Amara's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the trophy, her hands trembling slightly as she held it high. She turned to the crowd, her smile radiant, and gave a small bow of gratitude. In that moment, she felt seen, not just for her talent, but for the person she was and the hard work she had poured into her performance. As Amara exited the stage, a few teachers approached her, congratulating her with genuine warmth. Even the principal made a point to shake her hand, commending her for her outstanding performance. The whispers among the students grew louder as they questioned Mr. Lawson's earlier behavior. How could he doubt her? One student said. "She's incredible," another added. The murmurs of dissent were not lost on Mr. Lawson, who sat quietly in his chair, his face flushed with discomfort. Later, in the hallway, Mr. Lawson approached Amara hesitantly, his usual air of authority replaced by something resembling humility. "Amara," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "I owe you an apology. I underestimated you, and I was wrong. Your performance today was extraordinary." Amara regarded him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she replied, "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I hope this is a lesson for both of us." She didn't linger, choosing instead to walk away with her head held high, leaving him to reflect on the weight of his words and actions. With her newfound recognition, Amara didn't stop at celebrating her victory. During her speech at the school assembly the next week, she addressed her peers with confidence. "Believe in yourselves, no matter what anyone says. Don't let others' opinions define your worth. You are capable of more than they can imagine." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring students who had also felt overlooked or underestimated. Amara's triumph became a turning point, not only for her but for the entire school, a testament to resilience, talent, and the power of standing tall in the face of doubt. The impact of Amara's triumph rippled far beyond the talent show. Her performance and the events leading up to it became the spark for a broader conversation within the school. Students began openly discussing bias and inclusivity, questioning how the subtle prejudices they often witnessed could affect someone's confidence and opportunities. Teachers held impromptu discussions about fostering equity in the classroom, and even the administration started exploring ways to address implicit bias among staff. Mr. Lawson, once regarded as untouchable in his authority, faced a reckoning. Students who had previously been overlooked or dismissed by him began sharing their experiences, emboldened by Amara's example. The school leadership quietly encouraged Mr. Lawson to undergo diversity and inclusion training, a step that signaled a small but meaningful shift in addressing long-standing issues. Meanwhile, Amara's victory took on a life of its own. She became an inspiration for her peers, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds, who saw her as a symbol of resilience and self-belief. Her classmates began to see her not just as a talented individual, but as someone who had shattered barriers with grace and determination. She was frequently approached by younger students seeking advice, and her story became a rallying cry for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The following days were filled with congratulatory messages and newfound respect from students and faculty alike. But for Amara, the most profound change was within herself. Walking through the school hallways, she no longer felt invisible or underestimated. Her confidence radiated, and she greeted her peers with a warmth that reflected her journey. The whispers of doubt and prejudice that once surrounded her had been replaced by words of admiration and encouragement. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the day, Amara paused by her locker, taking a moment to reflect. She smiled to herself, the weight of past struggles lifting with each step forward. The hallway, once a place of silent judgment, now felt like a stage where she could truly shine. "They doubted me yesterday," she thought, her smile growing wider as she turned toward the exit. "But today they know my name." With her head held high, Amara walked out of the school, ready to embrace the future, knowing she had the strength to face whatever came next.